Okay, so today we're going to make a data table using Excel and just look at some of the basic features and that allow you to make a very professional table, but also will actually do some of the work for you. And then, of course, we can use the data table that we've created to create any kind of graphs that we want. There's a wide variety of features in Excel. The first thing I'm going to do, though, is I want to set certain things that are going to apply to all the cells. I don't want to go back and micromanage individual cells to put all this stuff in. So certain things are going to apply to everything that I'm going to do. So by clicking between where the letters and the numbers meet, it'll let you highlight the entire table. And the first thing, super important, is to make sure that you center everything, both left to right and top to bottom. So you want whatever is written in that cell to be right in the middle of it, which makes it much clearer to see what is in what cell. If you put the text, for example, all the way up against the left cell, it now is so close. And remember, this is going to be filled with numbers all over the place. So you're going to end up with some of the data very close to each other, and it just makes it a little bit more difficult to read. So centered both left to right. I would also go ahead and just click Wrap Text at this point. That way, if anything takes up more than one line, or it won't fit in the cell, it'll force it to be shown on more than one line. And that way you can put larger amounts of text in there without having to worry about making the cell ridiculously wide. This would be the time right now if you wanted to change the size of the font. I would stay between 10 and 12. Below 10 is a little hard to read, and above 12 it starts to look more childish. So 11 is a good size for it. You can change the font also. One thing to consider if you're going to change the font, though, is you have to consider your audience. So this is something that you should assume would be published in a professional journal. So they're going to have their own standards for what kind of fonts, and they're not going to choose things like, for example, Bauhaus would be one that they're not going to pick. They're not going to pick Comic Sans because some people consider them to be, they have their place, but it just doesn't look as good in a professional journal. So what I would stick with is simple things like Calibri is fine, Times New Roman is okay, Arial, but you could pick anything as long as it's a nice simple font that's going to be easy for anyone to read. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with Arial. I'll re-highlight the whole table. And the last thing I'm going to do is, the cells are a little small. I mean, I know what I'm going to write is definitely not going to fit in those cells. So I'm going to, right now, while I have everything highlighted, I'm going to go ahead and adjust these a little bit because it'll do this to the entire table. So I don't need to go back and try to highlight individual cells to adjust things. All my cells are uniform in length and width. So this is going to be really much more professional if we keep this uniform. That's basically it. We'll probably have to come back and adjust this in the end. We'll see how big the table comes out to be. We can always go back to it, highlight the whole thing, and adjust it if we need to. So the data that we're going to work with today is from an experiment looking at how aspirin affects the growth of plants. When you buy flowers, for example, what they're giving you is essentially the same thing that's in aspirin, and it helps the plant to draw water. So we're going to see if living plants are affected by these by adding aspirin. And we're just going to collect 5 data points, so we'll just make up some numbers here. This is our independent variable. Generally speaking, you want to lead off with your independent variable, thing that you purposely changed, and then you want to go to your dependent variable as you move down the line. Also, as you move down the line, you're going to have raw data versus processed data. So we'll have some processed data down here at the end. So what I'm doing is giving plants water that has a certain amount of aspirin in it. But I'm not just giving it to one plant. I need to give it to several plants because otherwise there could be something that was just specific to that particular seed that might really throw the data off considerably. So we're going to collect multiple data points for each of these different values of the amount of aspirin. So I'll have 1, 2, 3 plants. I'll be putting in their heights, and then I'm also going to need their average. So I can see that I'm going to want to make this table a little bit more concise. I don't want to put height 1, height 2, height 3, height average, or average height, and then also I have to put in the units. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge some cells together so that I only have to say the word height once. And I can see that I have a problem because there's no cells above these where I'm going to put the 1, the 2, the 3, and then the average. So I want to add a set of rows above this one. So I'm going to click on the number to the left. I'm going to right click and click insert, and Excel knows what I want. That I want to put a cell, I want to put a row above the point where I've listed. And you can also do that horizontally like this. So you can right click, and when you click insert, it's going to add another column, which is generally going to be on the left hand side. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this one. If I want to get rid of it, I'll just right click on it and I'll delete, and everything comes back. So what I want to do is merge these 4 cells together and make them into one cell, and these are all going to be heights in centimeters. So now I'm going to go ahead and start filling in the numbers before we finish up the last parts of the table. Okay, so what I want to show is how we can use Excel to do some of the math for us. So there are some really simple things. Actually, this thing that I want to do right now is to calculate the average of these three. So if I highlight any three columns like this, and I go to formulas, I can go down here and I have choices of some standard things. Like I could add them up, that would be the sum. Or I can just do the average. And because of the way I highlighted it, it is automatically going to put that average to the right of that column. I see I have a problem. So I'm going to get rid of this and do it again. Okay. And what I want to do now is I want to take the average for all of these. So instead of going and highlighting each one of these and doing this, I can come to this cell, I click back on the cell so it's highlighted, and I come down into the bottom right. And eventually I'll see a little black plus sign when I get over the green square in the lower right hand corner. I'm going to click and drag that down, and now I have all the averages. But I can see that it's done some really unusual things in terms of the amount of numbers that it's showing me after the decimal. So these two numbers go on essentially forever. So what I want to do is to force it to show me only the amount of precision that I had back here in the original measurement. So to do that, that's these two buttons right here. And if you're not sure which way, it tells you which way it wants you to go. But even if you don't want to, you can just click on it. If it goes the wrong way, then you just go back the other way. And so now everything is all cleaned up. I have the right precision that matches my original data. I'm almost ready to finish this data table. One thing that I would want to do though is there's a little discrepancy up here in the corner because I merged this cell and then that leaves a blank cell over here. So I'm going to do the same thing I did with the other one, and that is merge and center it. And basically I can highlight my table now. I can put borders around it. And that's it. The table is ready to go. It's nice and clean. It's easy to read. If you wanted to shrink it down a little bit, I mean, you could, but personally, I feel like it looks really good. I don't see any reason to make the cells a lot smaller. If you think about where it's going to go on in the document, this is not going to be the width of the page. This is probably going to be barely over half the width of the page. So I'm not running out of room or anything like that. I'm not going to put anything next to it. It's just going to be by itself. So there's no reason to make the data table any smaller than this. But Excel can also do a lot of other things. So for example, the average is a standard formula, but you can also have it do any kind of math that you want. So I'm going to say, for example, what if I wanted to divide the value that was in the average column here by the amount of aspirin to see if there's anything to the ratio of the height of the plants to the amount of aspirin. So any kind of formula that I want to apply like that, or any kind of calculation I want to make, it's always going to start off with an equal sign. That's the most important thing you can do. If you don't put the equal sign, nothing's going to happen when you hit the enter button. So what I want to do now is think about what cells do I want to do this math with. So if I look at this one, this is E3. And what I want to do with E3 is I want to divide it by A3. It's gone ahead and made the calculation. I'm going to apply the same technique that I did when I was calculating the average. I'm going to come down here until I get the black plus sign. I'm going to drag it down, and now it's made all the calculations. And then I'm just going to clean that up a little bit. And there's my ratio of the average height to the amount of aspirin. But maybe I want to multiply these two numbers. So maybe I want to multiply E3. I can do whatever I want. Basically anything. Square it, square root, anything that you want to do, you can do with this. So I'm going to take E3 and multiply it by A3. And come back and click on it, get the black plus sign, drag it down, and then clean the thing up. So then you could add these if you wanted to. So that merging the cells, this is something that if you want to reach level 4, that's really the level 4 for tables, but you still would reach level 3 if you just put height 1, height 2, height 3, and then average height. It's a little repetitive, but it's still easy to read, and everyone would understand what you're saying. So it's just your choice. It's tricky to think about how to do this merging. Sometimes you might have to write it on a piece of paper, kind of play out ideas about how it would look before you come in here, or you can just jump into Excel and just start pulling the cells around and just see. I mean, anything that you do, you can undo, or you could just abandon it. If it becomes such a mess, just abandon it, drop down to a lower spot, and start the data table all over again.